Okay, and I guess I should just kind of preface it with saying that we all, I think, work in a sense, at least from the ID side, we have some interaction with EBA, and Connor, one of our other team members, is an information developer. I think, is kind of our dedicated liaison, EBA liaison. And so I personally was excited when I saw your LinkedIn post about the Think Talk that you gave, and just kind of thinking about that. And as we start to develop our own in-app progressive disclosure models and develop a UI for content delivery, I think it's really important that we understand what your vision is as well. So that's why I kind of scheduled this thing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hope I want to keep this informal, unlike the Think session. So any questions would be great. Just fire them away. It's not my vision only. It's essentially a vision of a handful of people that have been laboring around this topic for some time. And Oleg Sidorkin, who's on this call as well, is not only a partner, but he's the chief architect and engineer for the EBA, including the vision of how we evolve to the concept of developing a UX solely through AI in real time for each user that's using a system. And so that's what essentially the session that both of us gave during Think. So I'll just share my screen now and really run through the talking points. And as a sounding board, does this make sense? Do you think this is a reach? The Think sessions are meant to be like some wacky ideas that we're working on, but I really feel there's a true pragmatic connection between what customers actually need from their information and from their applications, and how AI can assemble that vision for them based on contextual awareness and history and what needs to happen at certain points in time. So with that, I'll dive right in, and please interrupt if there are any questions. We also have a demonstration too. So I'll do slides for about maybe 20 minutes, and then a demonstration in terms of how I show EBA to others at the end.
That sounds great. Perfect.
Cool. So we start out with a user story, or really a quote, and this is an actual quote from a customer that's now, thankfully, a customer of EBA. And their use case was quite common amongst many industries and businesses that are facing these challenges of a growing business for sure, but with shrinking margins due to competitive pressures, and Amazon in particular. And due to these competitive pressures and shrinking margins, it's tough to hire people. You can't hire more people to handle and do the work and be able to live and actually survive under these new circumstances. And some companies that have invested in business process management are able to take advantage of routines around business process automation, BPA, RPA, robotic process automation, but those are also inherently pretty, not necessarily totally unstable, but hard to manage because there's a lot of static understanding of the process as it exists. And then finally, a lot of these companies have a tribal knowledge problem, which means all the knowledge in terms of solving problems or optimizing or just basically managing a process are all in the heads of the employees or in Word documents. As a matter of fact, many customers run their business using box notes, and that doesn't pave the way for efficient optimization around process management across the business. How do you codify that at present with present technology? So that's the sort of driving factor behind our work in this area, and Embedded Business Agent certainly is an attempt to solve this for sure. Why is this company in the situation? Many companies are, but really it boils down to software. Our historical software development, the cause of and solution to all of our problems is really software. If you consider how applications are typically developed or still developed in the most part today, and even in this unit, may add, is that we design applications around static implementation of a requirement in a box, which forces us to build UI and experience with typical screen real estate, whether it's a dashboard or a form or a menu-driven experience. You're effectively forcing a user to go down a process that we define as part of our application development, which means that all scenarios are coded to support the user stories, which means that if you have 20 user stories, you likely have 20 different ways to implement those particular avenues of a process, which of course forces the user experience to be the same for every person that uses the software, with limited change around the roles of who you are, what your scope is, etc. And I still believe that designers, creating UI based on personas is a root cause. This persona-based development is handy for understanding the needs of an individual, but actually taking that and building the application from a persona perspective necessarily leads you to that limitation in terms of exploration of your application assets and your real estate. So the way that EBA can be utilized, and in fact, EBA can be used to develop any application. You can rewrite campaign automation in EBA, and in a way that's extremely modern and very tuned into the individual user's need. So in the way you develop applications with EBA, it's less about building applications and structures and data models, but explaining your business in a semantic fashion to the EBA reasoning engine. What does a campaign mean? What does a report mean? What is a KPI? All these sort of business logical concepts need to be understood by EBA in order for it to do its work. And for that matter, what you define your business in terms of this data, your UX and UI are all assembled at runtime. So there's no pre-designing screens, which means that all UX is possible from day one. And by giving your human freedom to interact with your data, you actually discover, you put the control in the hands of your business user rather than in the hands of a UX designer. You're putting that person in control of their experience, whole experience. And the AI creates the relevant structures, whether they're screens or forms or reports or knowledge, that's relevant for every single individual user within the system. And then through the user's continual interaction, EBA begins to learn what is important to you, the business person, and begins to, effectively preempt and drive information that you should be aware of based on machine learning that we are developing as I speak. And in a sense, EBA is alive. It becomes this sort of conduit, this glue, this murky presence that exists within your organization to evolve with you as you go. So rather than a company being trained to work with an application like most of our software and competitor software today, EBA morphs and folds in with you, the company, which is extremely compelling when you see it all fall into place. So what does AI is the UX mean? What does that metaphor mean? It's really a turning point in application design. That's really what that metaphor is about. And like I mentioned, the control of interaction shifts from the designer and essentially the offering manager to an extent to the end user, the actual person interacting with the data and the functions. But the role of designer doesn't go away for sure. The role of your UX designer shifts from being a top-down governor to someone in the middle, like an interconnection designer. What are the data elements that a user would need to interact with to fulfill their job? What are the different components that are required that may be outside the scope of, say, marketing or commerce that are required to help them make better decisions, like external data, for example. So the designer is really less about building that sort of top-down experience, but more about enabling the interconnection of the components for the machine to then present those concepts to the end user. And so the role of the machine is actually elevated in this sense. It's actually becoming a step up in the decision-making process regarding, how to, present data to the end user through this concept of free exploration. And like I mentioned before, UX is continuously assembled and morphs for every user, not persona-based. So now we're going a little bit deeper in terms of how EBA begins to solve this. So in order for EBA to work properly in its fully realized form, it needs to be at the top. It needs to be at the single interaction point across all the systems of record, which means it has to observe. It has to be in a position to observe all possible engagements between your business user and your systems of record and their applications and related data. Like we say, it's like an umbrella system. It has to sit there at the top. The EBA itself is cross-channel, so it also doesn't care how you interact with it. Maybe you have EBA on your Slack channel. You want to talk to it in a group setting, or you're texting it by SMS, or you finally arrive at the office and you log on to your desktop. That continuation persists along your journey as a business user, getting coffee, etc. It's with you all the time. It's omnipresent. One of the other things that's pretty compelling is connecting orphaned systems. So I'm not sure how much you engage with our some of our customers, but this problem of these machines and old applications and data that sit off in the corner still plague our customers to date, even IBM. So being able to have this over-the-top system that can connect your modern systems and pull in data that may be locked into these orphan systems allows them to be useful in this way. And it calls into question whether re-architecture is something that customers want to do. If it's running, let it run, but simply enable an EBA to attach to it. And you avoid millions and millions of dollars potentially re-architecting the platform. That's a bit promiscuous, but I think that's a valid concern, and it's how you're going to use your money in your investment. Right. If you believe in the EBA way, you have to define your data and your actions in the semantic language that we prescribe. But once you do that, and once you do that with EBA, then it becomes usable by both human and machine. So not only can EBA capitalize on your definition of your business, but your humans can also refer to this as your corporate language. It's your ontology. It's your differentiating mark. And it becomes extremely valuable for building static applications, for partnerships, for connecting with other networks. It's a great way to have interconnected, as you get that for free if you go down this path. And if actions, and this is a point that we typically hit home, if actions, meaning if a decision that you make in a system is observable by EBA, then it could be known by EBA. So if EBA can observe how you use data and what you do with that data next, maybe you pause a campaign, or you call a vendor, or you send an email. If EBA knows about those events, then that becomes the basis for many opportunities to introduce automation, autonomic computing, autonomic resolution of issues that occur in environment, and even machine task takeover. So back to that quote from the beginning, this is a solution to help them resolve their business constraints. AI provides that ability to do better, faster, and cheaper. And then finally, we switch a little bit to the tech and some of the statements. I love this chart that Oleg put together. Value over complexity. Typical classic applications and user interface start with pretty high value. You can build an application very quickly, but over time, that static application tends to lose considerable value for simple reasons. Number one, it's statically built. In order to make it better, you have to dig into the code. You add forms, you add links, you add data objects, and over time that value diminishes because you're essentially you're perpetuating this singleton development of a particular UI. Whereas EBA, the value increases over time because it handles complexity gracefully. You have a new data object that you want to introduce. Well, you train EBA in that data object, and you immediately have use for it. Not only that, but EBA can reason the connectivity between your existing data assets and something new you want to introduce. This level of complexity is extremely hard to do through static applications. This is our business, by the way. This is why we spend all this money on application developers in our unit. It's because of the red arrow here. There's a better way, and EBA is certainly a better way than we're doing today. And a visual. This is a chart that I use all the time with customers, and this is where they kind of really get it and refer to it and use it. As I mentioned before, EBA sits at the top. It's your user interface that, yes, it can overlay with existing systems like we do today with Watson Marketing Assistant. It could also be the only front end that you have. As an example, our new inventory visibility API, it looks like EBA is going to be the only interface for that API. There's not going to be a static interface, which is awesome. It's perpetuating this notion of AI as the UX. EBA sits at the top, and it means that it has to use a series of horizontal controls in place. So we have multi-channel, like I mentioned before. We have reasoning to understand what you're trying to do in a system. It then uses a predefined ontology that we define as part of our business. So we actually train EBA on our domains like marketing, commerce, and of course supply chain. We provide the bare bones implementation of those business ontologies. But what's great is that the customers can simply append and annotate on our core. So we're not only beholden to that modernization evolution of the ontology. Our customers become contributors. And common contributions across hundreds of customers, we can observe. We can actually bring them in and bolt them onto the core. So, much like the API economy, through this scale that we're introducing, our customers become, in essence, part of our development evolution lifecycle, which I think is great. And finally, you have the connectivity between the logical, the orchestration, the semantic definition, and the physical. So that translation needs to happen. And this is where the API action system, the broker system, comes into place. So as an example, if you're asking a question about marketing performance and content, these are two semantic objects that are defined in the marketing domain that EBA understands. Hey, you're asking about content and performance. I need to make that correlation in my semantic memory, my orchestration tier. Then once I have the objects in question, with high confidence, I'm going to transform that into requests through my API broker system, which means that I'll call an API on Watson Campaign Automation, Watson Content Hub, and think about this. If a customer is using Salesforce, I can simply also reach out to Salesforce to get content and customers there. So you effectively have this orchestration across our own software, but vendor agnosticism comes into place where our competitors and our partners can participate. And the beauty part is, if we own the UX, if we own that interface, we relegate those competitors to being simply providers. They don't own the glass. This enables us to own the glass across IBM and across the competitive landscape, which again is extremely important for us if we want to grow this business. So you have the top-down orchestration, the reasoning. You have your middleware of all the different objects and microservices that we develop and our partners develop. Then from the bottom up, we have our platforms. We have our data platform. We have our machine learning algorithms that constantly produce models into our stack. So all this becomes part of your AI-driven ecosystem, from reasoning on top, learning on the bottom, and your functional microservices in between. It's like a Big Mac, I guess. And so what can you do with this? And this is what we're doing today. This is our unit, our science unit that we run for our organization, is enabling this always-on thinking machine for our domains, which means that a VP of operations that may traverse multiple business domains like supply chain, marketing, and commerce, this agent, because this person here is authenticated with EBA, EBA knows the data that's important to this person and can quickly correlate those information and provide what's important. What should I do today is a great example. It should be as elegant as asking, what should I do? And what should I do means that the machine has to understand what's important to you, your KPIs, and then understand what potentially is happening in your environment that will affect your KPIs, whether positively or negatively. And therefore, it can tell you campaigns are underperforming. You have a product problem. There's an aberration that's causing a shipment delay. And then you can tell the machine what to do. What should I do with this? Well, hand off. I'm going to pause the campaign, take action, notify, watch, observe. Things that you tell another human in your organization to do. Well, the machine should be able to do this, be able to orchestrate those communications, and of course, take action. So this is sort of what you're going to see from this unit over the next several quarters as we build this maturity into our stack. And then similarly, for every role in the organization, if you're a marketing professional, the agent can conform to your needs and goals for retail operations and order management, and of course, supply chain. So that's the presentation that I did. So any questions so far?
Yeah, I think it was it was really great and it was helpful, and definitely it's inspirational for sure.
Okay.
That's what I was about to say too. I mean, just talking about the learning aspect of this behind the scenes observing on what you do every day and then making that automated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of interesting points. I think, maybe not so much questions, but you might be able to expand on some of these. So, I mean, I like the idea. I mean, it would be interesting to explore this idea of what the designer's role becomes. I mean, I think in the same way that the design organization is trying to improve, design ops by creating patterns or a design system so that the designers are free to focus on problems that aren't, how do I round the corners of this button, but actual user scenarios and problems. And if you can even take that then away, then, what are these kind of meta levels of problems or solutions that designers can focus on? I think that, in itself is a really interesting future to explore. It seemed kind of exciting. I had a question right at the beginning about, which I think, a lot of people do when you have this kind of, machine learning system that recommends solutions or recommends, that you take certain steps or actions or, and that's the idea of like the unknown unknowns, right? So I can for sure ask many questions, and it can provide me with great answers, but what are the questions that I don't know that I should be asking?
Yep.
And so I think, you answered that a little bit for me and towards the end, but, what struck me really is that, really KPI definition and the ability to let EVA observe your behavior is probably the most powerful way to solve that. But I was just kind of curious if you had some additional thoughts on that.
Definitely. I mean, that is a challenge of our current science generation. What are the unknowns and how do we accomplish those things? So I think a couple things, group observation for sure. Observing multiple entities is going to determine and shed a light on those murky corners that folks have to, essentially triage in real time and cause problems. So the challenge is to identify as many of those dusty corners as possible as potential scenarios that may occur given a context. So if you imagine that, using hundreds and thousands of customers that interact with us every day, you're going to get essentially a critical mass of data that will make individual utilization of my problem, my domain, a bit easier to solve because of those group observations. So I think data availability and permission to use that data is going to be key to helping solve that problem. The other massive problem, which actually, believe it or not, is being solved by folks that are in the automated car arena, is the constant evaluation and reevaluation of the multiverse scenario. So at every given point in time, there could be many paths you take, and you're only going to take one for sure. How does a machine continue and simulate, 10, 5, 100 different scenarios that could have been taken at that point in time, and then reassure you that, or redirect you to say that, hey, your decision was wrong, you need to do this is better, or use this as a means to reconnect at a later date and say, next time, this is probably a better path. So that processing of all the data in so many different permutations is mind-blowing. And if you imagine a car and the exclusive OR operator in the business process, which is, the path, exclusive, one or the other, an autonomous vehicle has to constantly evaluate everything that's going on in place. So, put that, in a business process scenario, you have correlation there. So I expect a lot of what we can exploit in our realm of business process automation observation to come from those fields of study. But clearly, BPM, BPA, BPO have been around for some time, and some of those actually artifacts have been developed by IBM, have been developed by this team. Some patents we filed support this area, so you're going to see even on our own more opportunities to reduce risk from your environment, especially around decision making. So that's my riff on that topic, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and that's nice to hear. You guys clearly are doing something cool and you're passionate about it, so that's always nice. The last thing that I was gonna say was that kind of piqued my interest was you were talking about semantics,
Yeah.
a semantic description of a business, and then you had suggested that EBA has this ontology graph, and that a business would be able to append that graph. And I think that would be something that I would love to get a little more insight in. Maybe, not necessarily for this call, but we're in the process of potentially building out a new content model for our content delivery systems, and I would love to see how we could align that content model with some of the work that y'all have done in terms of conceptual modeling. So
I think that would be really important. There has to be a correlation between what you're doing in the ID field and how we link that model in terms of EBA mode. So for sure, we need to do that. I'll give you a brief tour of that now, if you like.
Yep.
If I just give you, you've probably seen this a million times. I'll just give you a couple of things maybe you haven't seen yet. So let's take as an example. Yeah, this is a pretty good one here. I'll just ask it. That's a one-off question.
I have compared benchmark named.
Thank you. So if you pull up this, have you seen this before? The breakdown of the words. Okay, this is why the content object model, the entities, the semantic model is critical to get right and that we're connected. It all comes down to understanding what a person is looking to do. So unlike intent training, which plagues many of our different software across the organization, Oleg has designed a deeper engagement using modern techniques in machine reasoning. Rather than taking the whole sentence as granted, he breaks down every single word and then relates each word to each other in their required formats, and then compares the output of this annotation with the semantic model that you defined from your business. So words here that are tagged that the machine is aware of and knows what to do with are, of course, tagged here in these different colors. So sent is a concept, mailings is a concept, action compare is a baseline ontological concept. So sent mailings together are a marketing concept. It's part of the marketing domain. And then you have things like time frame, width, benchmark. All these are evaluated at runtime to determine what objects are referring to, and then how do they relate to each other, and then finally, how do I get them and present them back to you? That's effectively the pipeline that's happening under the covers. So if we look a step deeper and look actually at the skill in the dev lab, this is the dev lab where all the agents come together to answer your concerns, the user's concerns. If you look at the campaign automation skill and check out concepts, there's 20 pages of concepts that define what it means to be in the marketing domain. You'll see relation, you see benchmark, you'll see template, queries, lists, folders. These are terms that the marketer uses on a day-to-day basis, which then in turn are used by the reasoning engine, EBA, to make that connection at runtime. Mailing, benchmark, sent mailings, time, history, performance, click rate, open rate. Those are all used to determine what's required, how to build it, and how to get those data out and present it back to you. So as you're defining your content model, extremely important to think in a semantic way, in a way that we can simply use your model in this fashion here. In fact, like if you're using Drupal, as I understand it, that's your data repository. You define your semantic model here, and then EBA becomes your interface to your Drupal backend content object model. And then you have an instantly usable assistant.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm glad you kind of went over this, Michael, because this has been an area that I've always tripped up with. So is it up to the business to add these entries, or like from day one? What is a first time use experience like when it comes to these concepts?
Right. So our responsibility, we as an IBM Watson Customer Engagement are experts in supply chain, commerce, and marketing. So EBA is required to be introduced into every piece of software that we have. In so doing, the offering manager, their business analyst, and the dev lead must define their semantic model from day one. They must define what it means to operate in order management, what it means to operate in supply chain insights. So, for example, supply chain insights came on board last year. They launched, about a month ago. they defined a supply chain insights concept model that is employed for customers right now. So Lenovo is using that first version of our concept ontological model for supply chain. And now that's in place, Lenovo could simply go to their dev lab and add a new entry. If they have a new data set, if they want to create a new agent as part of their structure, they can add it directly here in the interface and create a whole extension that interacts with their existing supply chain operation. This is all possible.
Amazing.
It's not vaporware. This is all possible right now.
Yeah. That's really cool.
And furthermore, where ideas we have a doc bot in place here. It's instantly available. So if you have new documentation you want to push out, it can be instant that it collects your information, makes it available to any customer in any scope that you have. And if a customer wants to add on to your repository, why not? Why not? Hey, I have a new way to do things. I want to add this how-to guide. Why not? Why not allow them to do that? And then you have the benefit of having not just a team here, but you enable your entire downline, the customer downline, to support you.
Pay them or have them pay you to develop for you, I guess. A little bit.
Could be.
Yeah. So I know we're a couple of minutes over, so I don't want to keep you too much, but I did want to just kind of open it up and see if there was any other questions from Mary or Jamie, or any further remarks from Oleg before I close the meeting.
Nothing from me. This was really cool.
No, this is amazing. I'm excited.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I know we're definitely working closely. We just had some meetings, and we got a few meetings coming up with Sam and Frank and Chris and some of the other members of the OM and design team. So, we'll continue that relationship, and I appreciate you taking the time to show us this vision.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And wow, the sun has really set where you are. I feel like
Yep.
Just Michael hanging out in the dark room. No, I mean, I love this. Thank you so much. I'm going to keep absorbing this idea of these concepts and things like that. So I might reach out to you individually with some questions, but also, really fascinating.
Our public site is EBA to AI, so we write a lot of stuff here. Want to check it out? Getting started, what have you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have it bookmarked. So the concept stuff is in there. I just haven't had time to kind of poke around. Is it under the components or the...
There's components, and even it's actually conceptual. So as you go into the agent itself, you can log in with any account. It's open for business.
Okay.
You go directly into the interface. You go to the dev lab. Maybe you're creating a new agent here, or you can click any agent. And there's contextual documentation right here. It's
perfect.
Directly with you, so you can.
Oh, I love that. Okay, great. Yeah, and Oleg, kudos to you. I know you've been working really hard.
Oleg is the vision, the executor of this vision.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, and you all have a good evening.
Thanks for setting this up, Michael.